Hey guys, how you going? My name is Dom, and in this video we're going to be creating a virtual keyboard using plain HTML, CSS and JavaScript. So this right here is the final result. It's a fully functional virtual keyboard using JavaScript with things like caps lock, spaces, line breaks and things like that. So it's all done with no extra libraries required aside from the icon library. To of course have these icons on the page or on the keyboard. So it's going to be responsive, touch friendly and easy to integrate with other parts of your code base or your system. So in terms of how useful it's going to be, to be honest, probably not, but it can be useful in things like point of sales applications or even kiosk applications. And this video is more for learning JavaScript and learning various different areas of JavaScript and essentially combining a lot of my previous content in a single video. So it should be fun and it should be interesting. So let's head over to this file right here, and we're starting fresh with basically a bare bones HTML file. Inside the text editor, it currently looks like this. So I've got here, of course, just the unordered list. I've got my own CSS file included. This won't affect the tutorial or the video. It's just for my own styles and colors. So let's begin here. Oh, real quick also, this text area is just just for example, just for demonstration, just got a bit of inline CSS here to just position it in the in a usable spot in the top right corner. So anyway, let's begin here by creating the directory structure for the keyboard, and of course, I guess going from there. So let's create a new directory inside here and call this one keyboard. Alright, and inside here we're going to have two files, one for CSS, one for JavaScript. So let's make one called keyboard.css and then one for keyboard.javascript. And then of course we're going to be including these two inside the head. So we can just say link CSS, we'll go to keyboard.css, okay, and do the same thing for the JavaScript. So making a new script tag with a source of keyboard.js. Cool. So we have these two files included. We can now include the Google material icon set, which is the icon library we're going to be using for the shift, done, space, return, and backspace icons. So if you head over to this website right here, I'll leave a link to this in the description. Basically, you go in here and you click on icon fonts for web and just copy and paste this link tag, and it's going to include the library on your web page. So go inside here and just paste it right there. Alright, cool. So now we have everything set up. We can begin on the HTML and CSS for the keyboard. So basically for this to work, we're going to need some dummy HTML, because all of the HTML structure for the keyboard is going to be eventually generated through the JavaScript file. But for now, just so you can actually see what we're actually going to be styling using CSS, let's just create some dummy HTML down here for the keyboard. So the way it's going to work is you're going to have a main div containing the entire keyboard itself. So that's the main div. Then inside here, you can have a div called keyboard_keys. So this one is going to contain all of the different keys from 1 to 0, A to Z, etc. So the reason why you're going to have two divs here is just in case you may want to add some extra functionality to the keyboard, which is outside of the keyboard keys container. So that's the reason why we have two divs inside here nested. Okay, cool. So let's now go inside the CSS and begin work on the keyboard and keyboard keys classes. So let's go inside this file right here and start off by targeting the keyboard class. So we can say keyboard, and the keyboard is going to be positioned fixed, so it's going to float on top of everything else on the web page. So we can say position as being fixed right there, and also we give it a left of 0 and a bottom of 0. And also a width of 100%. So now the keyboard is going to be on the bottom of the page with a 100% width. Okay, and it's going to be floating on everything else. The position fixed ensures the keyboard stays visible while you scroll down the page. Alright, we can give some padding of 5 pixels on the top and bottom and 0 for the left and right. And a background color here of the dcode green, so 004134. Now, the cool thing about this keyboard is you only specify the color once, and that is on the background. We're going to be using things like RGBA background colors to create different shades of the same color. So of course this means this is the only time you specify a color for the keyboard. Alright, let's give a box shadow of 0050px and then RGBA a 50% opaque black. Alright, and a user select of none to ensure the user cannot select the keyboard, and a transition of bottom at 0.4 seconds. So of course, as the keyboard becomes visible and hidden, there's going to be a nice animation as that happens. So that's why I want to have the transition bottom as a property right there. So I'm going to save this and refresh the browser, and we have this result right here. We have the keyboard in the bottom corner, looking pretty small right now. So let's just go back inside here and add a height of 100 pixels just to see a bit more detail of what's actually happening. So I'll save it again and refresh, and we have this right here. So far looking pretty good. We can now begin work on the state of the keyboard when it is hidden. So let's go back inside here and add a new class down here and say keyboard -- hidden. By the way, I'm using the BEM, the block element modifier CSS naming convention for these classes. Now you don't have to use it if you don't like, but I do recommend you just use the same classes as I'm doing here for your own code. Okay, cool. So we can just say bottom as 100%, sorry, negative 100% for the keyboard hidden class, and essentially the JavaScript is going to be toggling on and off the keyboard hidden class when the keyboard is visible and invisible. Okay, so I can just save this and refresh the browser, then go inside here, choose the keyboard with the inspector, and just add the class of keyboard -- hidden, and we can see it hides away. Of course, if I was to now remove it, then we get this right here, and that's what the JavaScript is going to be doing in the background automatically when you open and close the keyboard. Alright, so that is all for the keyboard class. We can now move on to the keyboard keys class, and this is going to look pretty straightforward. We can just say keyboard keys and give this a text align of center. This ensures all the keys are aligned in the center. Okay, cool. So now we have all of this, the main structure done for the keyboard. We can now move on to the actual keys. So there's going to be different kinds of keys. Let's first begin work on the most basic type of key, and that's going to be a single letter or number. So let's make a new button inside here with a type of button and also a class of keyboard _ key. Okay, and we can just put a inside there for demonstration. Once again, all of this stuff's going to be generated in JavaScript eventually. Okay, cool. So we have this. Let's just save this and refresh, and we have this right here. Let's now work on the keyboard key class. So back inside the CSS, let's scroll down and target keyboard key. We can now also just remove that height on the container. All right, cool. So for keyboard key, this one's going to be the largest rule set so far, and we can begin by giving it a height of 45 pixels. I find this is a good height for this type of thing, and a width of 6%. The reason why you want a percentage here is because the percentage allows it to be responsive as you decrease the width of the page or you're viewing on mobile devices. Also a max width of 90 pixels, once again, this max width I think just makes sense to me, just so when you are on larger screen monitors or larger screen displays, you don't want the keyboard keys to be very, very wide. Okay, also a margin of 3 pixels to have that spacing between the keys, a border radius of 4 pixels, a border of none, and for now a background of RGBA 255, 255, 255 at 0.2 opacity. So again, this is just going to be using the background color from up here and then making a lighter shade of that. So once again, this is how you only use a single color and it applies to everything. So I'm just going to save this. Actually, let's add a color. Let's say color as being white, and then save this and then refresh the browser, and we have this right here. So looking pretty close to this so far. Okay, so back inside here, let's have a font size of 1.05 rem, so 5% larger than the root element size. So that's that. An outline of none. This will remove the outline you get on mobile devices when touching the keyboard or the keys. A cursor of pointer, that's for desktop PCs. A display of inline flex. So the reason why we're using inline flex here is because when we actually put the icons on the keys, the icons won't be, or in most cases, they won't be centered. So having inline flex and then having align items as being center and then justify content as being center, these three properties are going to fully vertically and horizontally center the actual icon within the key. Alright, so I might just leave it here for now, then go back inside the HTML and make a second key, and this one is going to have an icon. So you can use the Google Material Icon Set. Now, by the way, you can use your own icon set, but I do recommend you just use this one for this video. But to actually use the Google Material Icon Set, you just create a new tag with a class of material-icons. Then you put the icon name inside here. So I believe there is a backspace icon name in the Google Material Icon Set. So I'm going to save this and refresh the browser, and we have this right here. So you can see that the icon is now centered completely due to these three properties. Now if I was to just go inside here and remove these three, we can see the icon is a bit higher. So again, having these three properties is going to, of course, center the icon in the middle. Alright, so here also there's one more problem. So the icon or the button or the key is higher than this one. So to fix that, we can go back inside here and we can add a property for vertical align and then top, and that'll fix that problem. We can then add a padding of 0 and a WebKit tap highlight color of transparent. So when you tap on a button by default on mobile devices, it's going to have a blue sort of opaque background color, and that'll remove that. Alright, let's just save this and refresh, and we can see here it's now in line with the other key. Alright, cool. So one last thing for the key, that's going to be a position of relative, because down below, when we work on the caps lock key, this little circle here for the light is going to be a pseudo element, and that's going to be positioned absolutely. So we need a position of relative on the key for that to work properly. Okay, so that is all for the key itself. Actually, there's one more thing, and that is when the key is active. So I'm just going to copy this and go down here and say key active. So when you're actually pressing on the key, we can change the background color to be a darker version of what's up here. So a bit darker at 12% opacity as opposed to 20%. So I can save this and refresh and then click on the key. We can see here it now gets a bit darker. Alright, cool. So back inside here, we also have, back inside here, we also have different types of keys. So we have things like, of course, the wider key. We have an extra wide key. We also have a bit of a darker key, and we have a key with a light. So there's different kinds of keys. We need to write some CSS different classes to support each type of key. So back inside here, now let's work on the backspace key. So let's add a class here for keyboard key --wide, and for that class, once again, I'm using BEM. This is a modifier class as part of BEM. So I'm going to copy this and go inside here and paste it down here and give it a width of, I believe it is 12%. I can save this, refresh. We now have the wider version of the key. And as I said, all of this stuff's going to be generated through JavaScript eventually. We also have the spacebar. So back inside here, let's just copy this and paste it down here. And this one, I believe, is keyboard _space. Let me just try that. Actually, I have the right one here. It is keyboard. Sorry, no. It is just spacebar. That is the name of the Google icon. So let's have a class here of extra wide. So keyboard key extra wide right there. And of course, just copy that, paste it inside here. And we can say width of 36%. So an extra wide one. And also a maximum width of 500 pixels, once again to ensure it is not super long on large monitors. So I can save this, refresh, and we have the extra wide spacebar. Cool. So this one here, for the little activatable lights on the caps lock key, we're going to be, as I said, achieving this through a after pseudo class. So let's go back inside here and add a new button for the caps lock. So duplicate this, and I believe this one is, let me get the right icon name here. It is keyboard _caps lock. And this is going to be a wide key, so we can add wide right there, and then we can say keyboard __key --activatable. So it is an activatable key. Basically, it just means it has the little icon, the little circle for the light in the top right corner. Okay, so let's copy this and go back inside this CSS and target the class. So here, okay, let's just type it out. So keyboard _key --activatable. This one, we're going to target the after pseudo class. So for those of you who aren't aware, the after pseudo class is basically a virtual element generated in CSS, which is going to, of course, be positioned in the top right corner. So to do that, we're going to first give it a content of nothing, a top of 10px, and a right of 10px. So these two say it's in the top right corner, 10 pixels from the left and right, and also a position of absolute. And the combination of absolute down here and relative up here in the parent is going to make all of this stuff work in the top right corner. Let's give it a width of 8 pixels, and the same for the height, and also a background. If I can type this out, so 8 pixels right there, a background of RGBA. It's going to be a 40% opaque black. A border radius also of 50%, and this is going to create the actual circle. So I can save this and refresh the browser. Then we can see here we get the little circle light thing in the top right corner. So for it to work and for it to turn green and on, well, that is once again a similar story. So we're going to be adding a class to this, but first let's write it in CSS. So we can just say copy this. It's going to be a class called active. Alright, so for the active class, we're going to target the after pseudo element. So this right here refers to the same element as all of this stuff right here. Okay, so for this one, we're going to say background and say 08FF00, and that is that light green. So now I can save this and refresh, and now when I add the when I add the active class to this, we should now see, so just like that, we should now see it turns to green. So that is how the caps lock light is going to work. Alright, and the last key is going to be the dark key. So for this one, let's just make it inside here. Let's copy this one and paste it down here and say keyboard key dash dash wide, but also it's going to be keyboard key dash dash dark. And the icon here, I believe, is what is it called? It is called check underscore circle. Alrighty, cool. So in the CSS, let's add that class. So the dark one is going to be pretty straightforward, a background of a 25% opaque black. So I can save this, refresh, and we have this right here. We have all of our different keys. So now we can work on the JavaScript, which is going to do two things. Of course, it's going to make the keyboard work, but also it's going to be generating the HTML, all of this stuff right here for the keyboard. So let's go back inside the index page, and we have this as a reference. So let's just comment out all of this stuff and begin building this in the JavaScript. Alright, so the first thing to do is to define an object, and this object is going to be the entire keyboard object itself. So we're going to contain all of the methods, functions, properties inside an object. So let's make a new constant here called keyboard equal to a new object. Alrighty, so it's going to need a few things. So the first thing, it's going to need to keep track of all the different elements. So we need to keep track of the main element, the keyboard keys container, and also all of the keys. So those three things right there. So inside here, let's add a new property called elements, which is an object containing three more properties for main, which is going to be null by default, keys container, once again null by default, and keys, an empty array. Alright, so main refers to the main keyboard element, the keys container refers to the keys container, and the keys is an array of the buttons for the keys. Alrighty? Cool, so of course, as we generate these elements, we're going to be setting the values inside the init method. So, secondly, we have the event handlers. So here, the way it's going to work, so the way your other code is going to interact and use the keyboard is basically when the other code says open the keyboard, that method is going to accept two functions, and they're going to be the event handlers or the callback functions. So they're going to fire off when the keyboard gets input or when the keyboard gets closed. So our object for the keyboard is going to support these two events, and basically we're going to fire them off automatically whenever the keyboard gets input or on close. That way the other code using the keyboard knows when these two events happen. Alright, so pretty cool stuff. Alright, and thirdly, we have an object, or sorry, a property called properties. This contains a lot of the different values for the current states of the keyboard. So it's going to contain two things: a value, which will be an empty string for now, and caps lock, which will be false. So of course here the value represents the current value of the keyboard, and caps lock is a true or false, saying whether or not the keyboard is currently in caps lock mode. So those are all our properties that we need to make the keyboard work. So as it goes for the functions or the methods, well, we can create all of these right now. So we can say init. This is going to run when the page first loads up, and it's going to, of course, initialize the keyboard. It's going to make all the elements and do all of that stuff. The second one is going to be one called create keys, and that's going to be a private method. So we can put an underscore here and say create keys. Now the underscore doesn't actually do anything, but it's a naming convention to say this is a private method, and the create keys method is going to create all of the HTML for each one of the keys. Alright, cool. The third function is going to be called trigger event, and this will, as the name implies, it's going to be triggering one of these two events. So this handler name is going to be either on input or on close, and it's going to be triggering them. It's going to be firing them off. And for here, I can just say console.log for now, until we actually implement it fully. We can just say event triggered. Okay, and then put the event name or the handler name plus handler name. Cool. So we can make the fourth one, and that's going to be toggle caps lock. So of course this is going to be toggling the caps lock mode. Once again, until we actually write the code for it, we can just say console.log, and we can just say caps lock toggle. Alrighty. And for the last two, that's going to be the open and the close. Alright, cool. So for the open, this will contain 3 arguments. So you can pass to, of course, your 2 functions for the event handlers, but also we're going to accept an initial value. So the initial value for the keyboard when it opens up, and also on input and on close. So the benefit of having this initial value is that way when you have something like a text area, for example. So if I had it's very fresh here. If I have like dcode inside here, of course we want the actual keyboard to spawn with dcode as the beginning initial value. So that's why you want to have the initial value property right there in the open method. Cool, so now we have all of the methods written out. We can start implementing all of the methods. So let's begin here with the init one. Actually, let's just scroll down a bit more and just say window.addEventListener. We're going to listen for the DOM content loaded event. So once all of the DOM has been loaded on the page, we can simply just say keyboard.init. So call the init method when the page or when the HTML structure or the DOM has been loaded fully. So we have all of this stuff right here. We can begin on the init method. So the first thing to do is to create these 2 elements, the keyboard and the keyboard keys elements. So let's say here create main elements. We can say this.elements.main is equal to document.createElement and say div. So the create element method is going to create a div in this case and store it virtually inside JavaScript. And a second one for keys container. Once again, it's going to be a div. Alright, so we have those 2 done. We can then say setup main elements. This is going to be adding some classes and also adding the actual keys. So we can say this.elements.main.classList.add. So calling classList.add is going to be adding a class. So we can say keyboard here. So adding the keyboard class to the main container, and also one for keyboard -- hidden. So we're going to be adding the hidden class by default. That way the keyboard is hidden by default. But for development purposes, we want the keyboard to be showing. So we're going to add 1 or any character here, just to, of course, ensure that this class of keyboard hidden is not added just while we develop the actual keyboard. So add something to the beginning of the class right here. So for the keyboard keys container, a similar story. We can say keyboard keys, keys container .classList.add, and we can just add the class for keyboard _ keys. Cool. So let's now go down here and just say add to DOM. So let's add these 2 elements to the actual document itself. So firstly, we can add the keys container to the main, so have that parent-child relationship between these two. So we can say this.elements.main.append child. We're going to be appending this.elements.keys container. Okay, and also we can then say document.body.append child this.elements.main. So adding the main keyboard container to the actual physical document. So I can save this one and refresh, and now we have this right here. So we have here the keyboard structure generated in JavaScript and displaying on the actual document itself. So everything is looking good so far. Alright, cool. So we can now work on the method for creating the actual keys. So this is going to be the largest method in this entire object. So essentially it's going to be returning what's called a document fragment. And document fragments are essentially little virtual elements that you can use to append other elements to, and then you append the whole fragment to a different element. So in this case, we're going to be creating the fragment in this function, we're going to be returning it, and then we're going to return the fragment and append it to the keys container, which will of course then append all of the keys within the fragment to the keys container. Alright, so inside here, let's begin by creating the fragment. So we can say const fragment is equal to document.create document fragment. And also we can say const key layout is equal to an array. So this key layout constant is going to be it's going to contain the entire key layout, so all of the numbers and letters and backspace, caps, enter, done, all of that stuff as actual strings. So I'm going to copy and paste this from my reference file and paste it inside here. So this is what the key layout looks like. So we have the top row, and I'm just going to be separating the rows with a line break. Okay, so of course just go inside here. I've got the code in the description, so you can just go ahead and copy and paste this array from the code and just paste it inside your text editor. And essentially we're going to be looping through each one of these individual characters or little strings, and then we're going to be creating elements, so each individual button element from each one of these characters. So let's go down here, and one last thing, we're going to be defining a function which creates the HTML for an icon. So of course we have your Google material icon set. We need to have a way to easily create the HTML, so we can just say const create icon HTML equal to a function which takes in the icon name, and it's going to return an HTML string. This will be I class material dash icons, and it's going to of course have the icon name inside here. So basically it's going to be your JavaScript function for generating this right here. Cool. So let's go down here now and begin looping through each one of these characters to of course generate some HTML elements. So let's go down here and say key layout dot for each. So for each key, we can have key as the parameter here. So for each one of these keys, we can begin by creating the actual button element. So we can say const key element is equal to document.create element. We're going to be creating a new button element. Alright. Then we also need to know if we need to insert a line break for each row after this key. So let's go back inside here. I'll show you what I mean. In the demonstration, we have here a line break to create the new row. So basically, after the backspace, the P, the return, and the question mark, there needs to be a line break. So back inside the JavaScript, let's make a new constant called insert line break equal to, and then we can just say backspace P, enter, or question mark dot index of key does not equal 1. So basically, we're just saying, is the key that we're looping through at the moment, is that backspace P, enter, or question mark? If it is, then we get true, otherwise we get false. And the index of method returns -1. Sorry, it should be -1 here, sorry. So it returns -1 if it is not in the array. Cool. And basically after, we're going to be checking if this is true and then adding the line break. Alright, cool. So now we can do some attributes to the key element. So we can just say add attributes / classes, and we can say key element.set attribute. We're going to be setting the type to be button. So once again, just mimicking or creating this right here. And also we can say key element.classList. We're going to add the class for keyboard_key. So of course, as we know, the keyboard_key class is the main class for all of the keys, and then of course we have these modifiers down here. So every key needs to have this class, which is why we're adding it inside the loop. Alright, cool. So now this is the main part. So we need to do different things based on which key we're currently looping through. So let's begin with the backspace, and this will be a switch statement. So we can say switch on the key, and we can begin with the backspace. So case backspace. If the current key is the backspace key, then we can say key element.classList.add. We're going to add the keyboard_key -- wide class to the element. Alright, and also we can say key element.innerHTML is equal to create icon HTML, that function up here, and we can pass in backspace. Alright, so of course the backspace key needs to be wide, so it's going to have the class of keyboard key wide, and also it's going to do different things for the actual on-click event. So when the key gets clicked on, when you press on the key, it needs to, of course, remove the last character on the current value. All right. So let's go back down here, and we can say key element.add event listener. We're going to say on click. We're going to run this function inside here, and basically it's going to say this.properties.value. Remember, this refers to the keyboard object. So it's saying this.properties.value is equal to the current value. So this.properties.value.substring. We're going to substring from the first character to the second last character. So this.properties.value.length -1, and this is going to remove the last character from the current value. Alrighty, and also because here the input has changed, we're going to trigger the onInput event handler to notify the code that is using the keyboard that the input has changed. So we can just say this.trigger event on input. Alright, and that is all for the backspace key. We can do a very similar thing for the caps, the enter or return, and the space and done keys. So let's just copy all this and paste it down here, and let's now work on the caps. So in the case of the caps key, we're going to be also adding the wide, but also we're going to add the keyboard underscore key activatable. Once again, the activatable class is going to be adding the little top right light to indicate the active state of the caps lock, and the icon is going to be keyboard underscore caps lock. For the on click event, well, when you press caps lock, then we need to toggle the caps lock on the keyboard. So we can just say this dot toggle caps lock. Alrighty, and we don't need to trigger any events because no input has changed, and also the keyboard hasn't been closed. So we can just say here instead key element dot class list dot toggle keyboard underscore key dash dash active, and then this dot properties dot caps lock. So this is going to be toggling on or off the active class that will of course display the green light. Okay, and also we're going to pass in here and say if the current state is caps lock equals true, then the toggle method is going to be forcing the class to be added to the key element. Alright, and that is all for the caps lock case. So we can go down here and add the one for the enter or the return key. This one is going to be pretty easy. It's just going to have the keyboard wide class. The icon is going to be keyboard underscore return, and on click we're going to be simply appending a line break to the value. So we can say this dot properties dot value is plus equals, so appending a line break, so \n. We can also trigger the event for on input. The input has changed, they have inserted a line break, so we can put that right there. And that is all for the enter. We can copy and paste this once again and do the same thing now for the spacebar. So for the spacebar, this will be an extra wide key. Alright, it's going to have the spacebar icon, and on this one it's going to be very similar story. Instead of having a line break, we're going to add, of course, a space, a white space. Okay, and once again triggering the on input event. And last but not least, we have the done. So for the done button to of course close the keyboard, we're going to be triggering the close function. So we can just say done, and we can say inside here check underscore circle, and the class is going to be wide, and also keyboard key underscore dash dash dark. And this is going to trigger the on close event, and also say this dot close. Okay, cool. So that is all of our special 5 keys done. We can now work on the standard keys. So we can just say down here for the default, so if none of these cases are true, if they're anything but the special keys, so caps, backspace, etc., then we can simply not even have this stuff right here. Instead, we can just say key element dot text content is equal to key dot to lowercase. So we don't need any extra classes added. It's already got the keyboard key class, and also it doesn't have any icons. So it's just going to be the text content is going to be the current key dot to lowercase. So currently all of this is lowercase, but just in case you may have mistakenly made one of these an uppercase, well, the to lowercase is of course going to force that to be lowercase. Okay, and when a regular key gets pressed on, then we can just say this dot properties dot value plus equals this dot properties dot caps lock. So if caps lock is on, then we can say key dot to uppercase. Otherwise, we can say key dot to lowercase. Alrighty, cool. And also, of course, trigger the on input event. Alright, so just to recap, here we are looping through each one of the strings here on the key layer, and we're saying, you know, we have a new button element. We're also saying whether or not we need to insert a line break. If it's backspace, P, enter, or question mark, we do. We're adding a standard attribute and a class list to the key, and then in this switch statement, we're basically doing different things for each one of these special keys. So backspace, caps, enter, and space, and also done. For these standard keys, we're just simply having the text content of the button to be the key, the lowercase version of the key, and of course having the input event trigger down here and the key value appended to the internal value property. All right, cool. So we have the key element pretty well constructed. We can then finish off here, finish off the for each by, let me just see where we are here. So finish it off by simply then saying fragment.append child. We're going to be appending, of course, the key element to the fragment. So remember, the fragment is just a little container for all of the keys. Okay? And then we can say if we need to insert a line break from up top, we can say fragment.append child, also append document.create element. We can create a new line break element right there. All right, and then last but not least, or finally, we can simply then return the fragment. All right, so now all of these keys have been looped through. They've all been constructed into a button. We're now returning all of the keys as a document fragment. So now it's simply a matter of appending the fragment, so appending the return value of this function onto the keys container. So we can say this.elements.keysContainer.append child. We're going to be appending this dot create keys. Alrighty, cool. So I can save this and refresh the browser, and we have this right here. We have all of the keys generated. If I go inside here, we can see we have all of the classes wide activatable. The icons have been rendered. All of the stuff is working just fine. Okay, so now what we can do is we can actually test the keyboard out. So let's just say WSE. We can see here we get the event triggered, so the onInput function is supposedly being called here. And if I log out the keyboard object and press enter and expand this inside the properties, we can see the value is WSE. So the keyboard is working pretty well so far. We now need to just implement some of these functions down here to make everything work just fine. So let's first implement the toggle caps lock function. So this is going to be pretty straightforward. We're going to simply say this.properties.capslock. We're going to set the caps lock property to be the opposite of what it currently is. So adding the exclamation mark, adding the not operator here is going to flip the current value of the caps lock. And also we want all of the keys to turn uppercase, as we can see here, when the caps lock is turned on. So to do that, it's pretty straightforward. We just need to have all of the keys inside this array. So what we're going to do is once all of the elements have been appended and working fine, we can then say where is it here? We can then say this.elements.the keys is equal to this.elements.keysContainer.query selector all. We're going to select all of the buttons with a class of keyboard_key. So all of the keys we created inside here are now going to be as a node list object, or node list, it's basically like an array stored in the keys property. So I'm just going to save this and refresh the browser and then log out the keyboard object and expand this once again. Inside elements, we have here a node list of 44 elements. If I was to expand this, we have each one of the keys referenced inside JavaScript. Alright, so we can then simply just loop through all of these keys inside the caps lock method, and then basically just say if its caps lock is on, then of course uppercase those keys. So we can say for const key of this elements dot key. So for each one of those keys, we can say if key dot child element count is 0. So this is basically checking if the key does not have a icon. So of course, when you have an icon, so inside here, when you have an icon, where is it? This one. So this button has an icon. So this here is an element. So the child element count for this button is going to be 1. For the regular keys, such as the Y key, this is going to have a child element count of 0. There are no tags or elements inside there. So we can say here, if it's a standard key, then we can say key.textContent equals this.properties.capslock. If it's turned on, then we can say key.textContent.uppercase. Otherwise, convert it into lowercase. Cool. So I can save this and refresh, and we can now test out the caps lock functionality. So refresh here, press this, and we get not only the light is turning on, but also, of course, the keys are turning into caps lock, on or off, and also the content is also working. So I pressed a few keys here with caps lock and caps lock off. We can say keyboard.properties.value. You can see here the first 5 have been uppercase. So that's all working perfectly fine. Alrighty, cool. So back inside here, let's now implement the trigger event method. So this one is going to say if type of this.event handler's handler name is equal to a function. So we're saying here, is a function specified as the value of one of these properties. Of course, this will be either on input or on close. So if there is a function specified, if the code has specified a function for the handler, then we can fire it off. So we can say this.event handlers for the handler name, once again, either going to be input or close. We're going to trigger the function, and we're going to pass in as the first argument this.properties.value. So we're going to provide the value, the current value of the keyboard to the code that is using the keyboard. Alright, cool. So now what we can do is we can probably implement the open method just so we can start using the on input and the on close methods to demonstrate how this works. So for the open method, we're going to say this.properties.value is equal to the initial value passed in, and if it wasn't passed in, then we can just say an empty string. So this is just saying if it was provided, then use it, otherwise you use an empty string. So resetting the value of the keyboard. And also we can say this.eventhandlers.onInput is equal to onInput, and the same thing for onClose. So we can see here how this type of check works. Basically, maybe the user doesn't actually provide a function for onInput, so it's going to be not a function. Otherwise, it's going to work. So we have those two right there, and also we can say this.elements.main.classlist we're going to remove the class of keyboard dash dash hidden, which will of course display the keyboard when you call the open method. So let's just go inside here, and we're going to remove the extra character here from the class. So get rid of that. It's now ready to go. So now what we can do is in this event handler, we can say keyboard dot open, and here we can provide the initial value. So for example, we can say dcode here as the initial value for the keyboard, and for the onInput function, we can provide a function just like this. And remember, the function is going to be given an argument, the current value. So we can say here current value as a parameter, and of course that'll contain the current value of the keyboard. So we can say console.log current value, and this right here is just an example of how other parts of your code or your system is going to be using the keyboard. It's going to be through the open method, and this is what I mean by it's going to be easy to integrate. Alright, cool. So back inside here, we can also provide a function for when the keyboard gets closed. So we can once again have the current value parameter, and we can say console.log keyboard closed, and have the finishing value as being current value. Okay, cool. So we can now save this and refresh the browser. You know what? Let's go back inside here. It'll be clearer if I put something here. If I say value change, and then here it is, and then add that. So now we can see we should get this in the console. So I can save this and refresh, and then start typing, and we get here value change. Here it is, decode, and etc. So we can see first off the initial value is working just fine. We get decode here, and of course we get all of this stuff. So of course this is how your other code is going to interact with the keyboard. And if I was to press done here and close it off, we get keyboard closing and then finishing value decode. Of course we need to actually implement the function to close the keyboard, so let's do that right now. So back inside here, for close we're going to say this.value. This.value is equal to an empty string, so of course this is going to be resetting the value. We're also going to reset the two event handlers, so onInput, onClosed. Alrighty, and we can then say this.elements.classList, .main.classList. We can remove, we can add the keyboard hidden, which will of course hide the keyboard off the screen. So now we should have the keyboard in pretty much a full working order. So I can save this and refresh, and we can close the keyboard and it works just fine. So that is the whole keyboard basically done. So the way it works for the demonstration, so back inside here, the way I've made it so you're able to click on the text area and make the keyboard pop up and have the value being passed in there. Well, all I'm doing here is I'm using the open method to use the keyboard. So I've also made a bit of a helper class for that. So let's go ahead here and inspect this. So we have here a class on the text area called use keyboard input. So this class right here is a special class defined by me, which will basically trigger the keyboard for the text area or the input that the class is on. So let's go ahead now and actually implement this use keyboard input class. All right. So essentially, it's an example of the keyboard being integrated with and used. All right. So back inside here, let's first off just add the class to the text area. So we can say class equal to use keyboard keyboard input, just like that. And we can also just go ahead and just remove the HTML from down here. Cool. So now we have this class. We can then go back inside the init function or method for the keyboard, and we can just say down here, automatically use keyboard for elements with .use keyboard input. All right, and we can just say document.query selector. So for basically every single input or text area with a class of use keyboard input, we're going to say for each one of those, we're going to say element. We're going to simply add the event for focus. So when the text area or input gets focused on, we can say element dot add event listener on focus. We're going to run this function, and of course it's going to be opening up the keyboard. So we can say this dot open. Okay, we can pass in here as the initial value, it's going to be the current value of the text area or input. So we can say element dot value, and then for the on input event handler, we can say value, and this is of course the current value for the keyboard. We can say current value. We can say element dot value equals current value. So the value of the text area or input is going to be set to the current value of the actual keyboard. Alrighty, and I think I also made a mistake down here. This should be this dot properties dot value, not this dot value. So that's all good now. Alright, so I can just save this one. You know what? I'm also going to remove this open down here. That was just for demonstration of the usage of the keyboard. So let's get rid of that. Save this and refresh, and this should work just fine. So I'll refresh this, then click on the text area, and it works just fine. Press enter again, and then go back inside here. Now, of course, the keyboard value is currently set to, of course, the value of the text area. If I was to press done and check out again, now it is it's nothing, of course. And once again, press it again, and then do it again, and this time it is the value of the keyboard. So that's how it works, and that is how, or that's an example of how you can actually integrate the keyboard with your existing code. Otherwise, you just pass in your initial value, your on input, and your on close. Alright, yeah, so I'll leave a link to all of this code in the description. You can go ahead, download it, and use it. Thanks for watching, guys. Alright, I'll see you later.